Today I have the pleasure of sitting down and talking to my good friend, the Texas Education Agency Commissioner, Mike Morath. So please help me welcome Commissioner Morath to TPS. All right, so I'm gonna do a quick bio on Commissioner Morath. He was appointed by Governor Greg Abbott in January of 2016 and was confirmed in March of 2017. As commissioner, he heads the Texas Education Agency, which oversees pre-kindergarten through high school education for more than 5.5 million students enrolled in both traditional independent school districts and public charter schools. Prior to becoming Education Commissioner, Morath served on the Dallas Independent School District Board of Trustees for more than 4 years, and during that time he focused on academic improvements, and by his final year on the board, DISD had seen improvements in various areas, including a rise in kindergarten readiness, math proficiency, and graduation rates. Yeah, there we go. Mike graduated from Garland High School in the Garland Independent School District, and thanks to the great public school education he received in Texas, he went on to earn a Bachelor of Business Administration from George Washington University in only 2.5 years. Man, I took 5.5 years, I think, to get through college. While in Dallas, Mike helped organize a trip to orphanages in southern India to set up clean running water systems and volunteered at an eye clinic in rural Mexico, where he met another volunteer, Dr. Laura Vandra, who is now his wife, and they are the proud parents of 2 daughters and 2 sons. So please help me welcome Texas Education Agency Commissioner Mike Morath. So, Commissioner Morath, welcome to TPS.
I'm excited to be here.
Good. Well, let's get the first question out of the way. Obviously, yesterday, Houston Mayor Sylvester Turner said that he expects HISD to be taken over by the state. So what do you have to say about that?
I also heard those news stories. So the Supreme, we have been in court with Houston ISD. Houston ISD sued us and received an injunction in 2020. Houston had a record where they had some of the most chronically underperforming schools in the state of Texas. Cashmere High School had been an unacceptable campus 11 years in a row, Wheatley roughly 7 years in a row, and the legislature passed a law that said if you have a campus that is unacceptable for 5 years in a row, that the Commissioner of Education is required to intervene. It's not discretionary. It is required to intervene because the legislature was interested in making sure that all of our school systems support all of our schools. It is not about some of our kids learning. It is about making sure that we can support all of our kids learning. And so we did intervene based upon that law, based upon the requirements of that law, but we've been enjoined in court for the better part of 3 years. Last month, the Supreme Court issued an opinion saying the injunction's over, and as of, and we are actually still waiting for the injunction to be fully released, I believe, as of this moment. But we are still, in fact, required to act.
Yeah.
So I'm a constitutionally sworn officer, and I'm going to follow the law.
Good. Well, thank you for doing that. There's a lot of kids in Houston that deserve a lot better than what they've been getting, so appreciate that. Speaking of, one of the things that, you and I have talked a lot about in the past, and we're on a coalition to fix this, is about increasing academic rigor and standards in classrooms. In fact, recently in a Pub Ed committee hearing, I believe interim hearing, you talked about how TA did a study where only 19% of what was being taught in classrooms was at grade level. So can you talk a little bit more about this and a little bit more about your findings, and then also kind of expand on the ramifications of this and what we're seeing across the state?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I'll tell you, this is probably the single most important issue that you really don't ever hear about. So much of why do we have school? We send kids to school to learn stuff. So this is the reason we have school, and it is important that while they're there, they're being exposed to rigorous content. They're being pushed. They are being stretched. The kids are amazing. All our kids are amazing, and they will rise to the expectations that we set for them. But if the content that we set for them is at this level, they can rise there. But if the content that we set for them is here, then that is what happens. And so we, just before COVID was a thing, we began analyzing classroom rigor in some detail. And there was a national study that was done on this, and we reproduced the study methodology in a bunch of elementary schools in Texas and found that only 19% of reading language arts assignments that were given to kids in Texas public schools was actually at or above grade level. And so fully 81% was below grade level. And no one is doing this on purpose. This is not an intentional thing, but it's sort of, imagine that you're reading a story in school, and you're reading a story about going to the ice cream store, and instead, if you could be reading a story that had far richer vocabulary, that was talking about the War of 1812, that was really engaging the synapses. And we see, unfortunately, far too much material that is beneath what our kids should be exposed to, that is not challenging enough. And this is not true everywhere. I have been in classrooms in the state of Texas where 5th graders are reading Shakespeare. And they're perfectly capable of doing this, regardless of background, as long as we've been supporting them rigorously enough. But that is the anomaly, not the norm. And so this is something that we've got to bring attention to, because if our teachers are working 60 hours a week, pouring their heart and soul into our kids, teaching what the districts have given them to try to make sure that it's rigorous, and then our kids are working hard and they're getting A's and B's in class, but all of the stuff that you were getting in 3rd grade was really more appropriate for a 2nd grader, well, then by the end of 3rd grade, you're going to know what a 2nd grader should know. It's as simple as that. And so this is a truly significant challenge that if we cannot figure out how to improve, if we don't take efforts to try to improve, we should not expect achievement to go up. We should not expect our kids to learn more, because if they're not reading about Shakespeare in 5th grade and they're reading about hot air balloons, that's what they know. And so it is making sure that we have equipped our school districts, that we've trained our principals and our chief academic officers and others, that while folks are becoming candidates, the individuals who wish to be teachers, training them truly on what the rigor expectations are, giving them practice opportunities so that they can see how eager young minds respond to that degree of complexity. And it's remarkable when it happens. Again, I was in another classroom. This was in southern Tarrant County, almost all low-income students. And this school had recently gone through a very significant upgrade of its instructional material. They were using much more rigorous stuff than they had in years past. And they were really proud of this and wanted to show off what was happening. So I'm in a 1st grade classroom, and the teacher shows a photo on the wall. It's a building, and the teacher says, "Okay, kids, what's this building?" And these are 1st graders, so they're like this and kind of falling out of their chairs. Everybody's very excited about it. And the teacher says, "Okay, everybody, yell it out." And they said, "It's Monticello." These are 1st graders that recognize Jefferson's home by sight. Same school, which again had significantly upgraded the rigor that kids were exposed to. And these are all students. This is like a 90% economically disadvantaged school. All of these families essentially need some kind of federal assistance to make sure they can eat regularly. And yet, at this same school, walk into a 5th grade classroom, and the lesson, and this is actually a reading language arts lesson, so the lesson is about deconstructing text and drawing meaning from text. Well, the text they pull was Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. That was the text of the classroom. Now I have done a lot of school visits in my day, and I was feeling pretty tingly after that one. I was very excited to see, because this is what we've got to do.
Yep.
And if we cannot, if we don't do that, if we don't figure out how to improve the clarity with which our principals or school leaders can see this, and then equip our teachers with these kinds of resources, then we should not expect outcomes to go up. We shouldn't expect our kids to see this improvement in knowledge base over time. And so yes, I think this is an unbelievably critical issue in terms of how we can provide rigorous instructional materials in some form or fashion. Obviously, in a system of local control, we need people to to have flexibility, and you want to have teachers be able to exercise their creativity and differentiate lessons for their individual kids, of course.
Yeah.
But sea level needs to be high enough that we can bring all boats along for that process.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And maybe following on that, as we kind of raise that standard and that rigor, we also have to recognize that teachers are in a pretty tough spot, right? They not only are having to develop the curriculum, but they're also having to implement and teach it. And so what are the things that we should be looking at to ensure that we're properly supporting teachers so that they are therefore introducing and having the rigor that we expect of our kids, and so that our kids aren't subject to the tyranny of low expectations that they are right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. It is a not uncommon practice today in a Texas public school for teacher teams to be convened for about an hour a week to be given planning templates, and then in that 1 hour a week, with the planning templates and then some resources that they can find on the internet that perhaps have been curated by their district, to then plan 30 hours worth of instruction. And that doesn't work. You can't plan 30 hours of instruction in an hour. You can plan 30 hours of instruction in about 90 hours. This is what it takes. And so because that is a fairly typical experience, we have a huge number of teachers that they are every night working way into the evening hours, scouring the internet for lesson materials to try to give their kids rigorous experience. They're on Pinterest and Google on Friday, Saturday, Sunday nights. And they, we have incredibly professional teachers, and they're dedicated to do this. But this is, in fact, hard work. And also, I don't know if you've been on the internet recently, but there's some weird stuff on the internet. So there's this is not, this doesn't set up a system for sort of perfect design of instructional materials. So my background, I ran a software company for about a decade, and people presume things about me, but I'm very old-fashioned, and to some extent, we're simply talking about textbooks. Do the teachers have the teachers' guides? Do the students have the textbooks? Y'all are, I'm not going to make guesses about people's age in here, but when I was a kid, you wrapped the textbook with the grocery bag, right? We don't do that anymore because textbooks are much rarer in our schools because there's this approach to these planning templates, and everybody's spending time building the lessons. Which is really burdensome for our teachers. I mean, it is truly burdensome. You imagine if you're a first-year teacher. Teaching is the hardest profession. I don't know how many of y'all were former teachers, but it is legitimately the hardest thing that humans do. A teacher has to understand psychology and content and be filled with limitless reservoirs of energy and incredible intellectual capacity, and then listen to wave after wave of human stories, because we teach humans, and this is we're a fallen, flawed species, and this is just difficult work, and they have to mold all of these eager young minds. I mean, for brain surgeons, at least we give them the benefit of one patient at a time and anesthesia. So this is incredibly difficult work, and so if you are a first-year teacher, to understand the arc and flow of the lesson design, that I'm going to cover a topic in September, and then I'm going to hit that topic again to reactivate memory in December a certain way. And I'm going to do that again to activate that memory again in February. For first-year teachers, if we have not given them structured, well-designed sets of materials, this is the worst year of their lives. Now, for very experienced teachers, they've already figured all this out. They got the 3-ring binder. They've got it all. They're like battle-hardened veterans. It is less of a need there, but we're doing a disservice to huge numbers of folks that have been called to do this work, that are dedicated professionals, and we have not equipped them with the resources that they really need to be successful.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And maybe an additional question onto that is, what responsibility do our institutions of higher education and where these teachers are being trained and taught, what responsibility do they have in this? Are they preparing teachers in the way that Texas needs them?
In the aggregate, no, they're not. Again, the work of preparing. So first of all, most of our teachers actually don't come from undergraduate higher education institutions. They come from alternative certification programs, and that are largely sort of online learning institutions. But if you again think about a 4-year undergraduate degree, we're only a fraction, I don't know, maybe 20% of our teachers now come from what you would typically think of as an educator preparation program at a university. You would still want them to be trained on the right evidence-based practice. And if you are thinking about this the way that we think about preparation in many other careers, if you're going to be an engine mechanic, you do need to learn a little bit about fluid dynamics, about understanding how engines function. But you also need to spend time with a wrench in your hand working. Otherwise, you're not going to be prepared. So for a teacher, you need to understand psychology, you need to understand content, you need to understand a host of practice details. But then you need to be practicing. You need to actually be in a situation where I can practice with adults and I can screw that up and it's okay, and then I can maybe practice with a group of kids, but there's an adult with me that's sort of mentoring. Again, let's go back to the neuroscience example. For brain surgeons, we don't say you have a degree, go ahead and start cracking open skulls. We have a residency process. There's a very methodical preparation process to make sure that you understand what the right evidence base is. And so there's an aspect of this which is about a practice, but there's also just the right evidence-based practices. And often we see our schools of education providing instruction on things that are not evidence-based. The best example that I can think about this is in the area of early childhood instruction for reading, for literacy. So the human mind is a fantastic creation. You think about what our Creator has set up. There's more dendrites or neural connections in the human mind than there are stars in the known universe. It is the most complicated creation, and so much of the human mind still is a mystery to us. But we understand how humans learn how to read better than we understand almost everything else about how the brain works. And it comes down to sort of two important things. One, you have to have background knowledge. You need to know, like Francis Scott Key, the War of 1812, this sort of thing. You got to have background knowledge. But two, you need to know how to decode sounds that are shaped. And so when you see a letter, the important thing is not that letter is called a B. The important thing is that makes a b, b, b sound. And kids learn how to read by learning all of those letter sound connections and blending them together and practicing that repeatedly. And yet, with some regularity, an individual who wishes to be a teacher that goes through an undergraduate education program will be given instruction that says, maybe show them a picture and have the kid guess at what the word is based upon the picture. And that's like poison to the formation of the word form area in the human mind. And we should not be doing this. You should not see this in universities. You should not see this in schools. You should not see this anywhere. If this was 1950, maybe it's still worth a debate on this, but the science is in. We know how this works. Yeah. And so it is systematic direct instruction in phonics. Every kid needs it. There's a order that matters. You do the sound before you do the sound. This has been tested. We know why. And so that's got to happen, and that's what needs to be taught in our universities, and it is not consistently taught today.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, so let's, obviously with COVID, it really changed a lot of the way that parents were paying attention to their child's education. So, one of the things that I think it really gave parents an idea of what was actually happening in classrooms, because suddenly it was on a screen in your home as you're watching your kid trying to learn remotely. So, parents, I think, gained a real appreciation for transparency. So what are some of the ways, what are some of the things the legislature, or you might not be able to get in that, but what are some of the things that we should be looking at to ensure that parents can have the transparency that they need into what their kids are being taught?
Yeah, this is an incredibly important question. I mean, I'm not just a commissioner. I'm also a client. We have twins that are still too young to go to school, but have a first grader and a fourth grader, and I sort of live this same experience. How can I help support my kids with their homework? How do I know what they're doing? And under state law today, it is a parent's lawful right to gain access to any of the instructional materials that their kids are taught. But let's go back to the example that I just described. If the way that this actually works in practice is teacher teams are given lesson templates like a week before teaching happens, and they have to fill in those templates on the fly, it is logistically almost impossible for a parent to be able to follow along. So you can pass all the laws you want about curriculum transparency, but it just can't happen. The only way a parent would know is to sit in the classroom the entire time, which is the reason why parents gained newfound visibility into this during COVID. Yeah. And so one of the questions is what obligations do school districts have to try to create some degree of consistency in instructional materials? What obligations do school districts have to provide textbooks to their teachers to help the teachers out? But if that happens, then of course then the parents can follow along with the textbooks. These are things that can significantly improve curricular transparency. And in addition to just knowing, let me see what the homework is so that I can follow along. I mean, is that posted online? Do I have the ability to get a copy at the house? These are things that need to happen, but of course you have to have some kind of logistical system to pull that off, because if we're already overburdening our teachers with spending all this time on lesson design and nights and weekends, and then we add the additional burden of, please upload that to a website, it's not going to work. So the question is, are we asking districts to provide the right organizational supports to teachers? That's sort of what I think. This is not a problem a teacher can fix. They're living in an engineered environment that someone else has engineered for them. So this is how is that school set up to organize curriculum, to organize the master schedule, to organize the teacher's workload. And so that is hard from a public policy perspective. That takes technical assistance. That takes a lot of coaching and guidance and support. Yeah. So there's not an easy answer, but some degree of can the state provide some vetting for instructional materials, and can the state provide some clarity as to textbook options? Can the state help districts select among a variety of well-vetted textbooks? And then can each one of those textbook manufacturers then be required to provide that curriculum transparency to all the families in districts that choose them? Like this would be a very good solution in adding transparency for families. Yeah,
I love it. Thank you. So obviously, along with COVID, right, and we've seen this kind of across the nation, kind of this wave of parents wanting to be more empowered when it comes to their children's education. And as we talked about a little bit on the transparency side, they feel like the systems, it's a little opaque, and the quality, which we also talked about, maybe is not up to snuff, and the standards and rigor aren't there. And when they try to get involved, they feel like they don't have a lot of say and a lot of options. So what are your thoughts on what's happening as you see kind of, we're kind of hitting this new age in education, and there's a lot of, I think, innovation happening, and there's a lot of parents wanting a lot more agency in what is happening in their children's education. So what are your thoughts on what you see happen across the country and across the state?
I think anything that we can do to increase parental empowerment, parental control over their child's education, parental insights is a good thing. This is a shared responsibility. My wife and I, we have made the decision we're not going to homeschool our children because that's not going to work in the Morath household. It's for those of you who have tried and I can't get my daughter to listen to me so it's just not going to happen. Anyway, so we need school of some kind for our children, but we entrust our child to the school. They're still our children. We have expectations for the school. We understand they have hired professionals to try to do a job and understand that this is difficult work. But we should really always be on the same page. What's my little girl learning this week? What is she struggling with? What can I do at home to help? Whether that's supporting her with her homework or giving her a stern, loving support to make sure she's listening to her teacher, whatever it is. We have to remain on the same page because it is a partnership. It's this sense of responsibility. These are parents' kids. I can tell you, my kids are my kids, not the school's kids. But I'm counting on the school to help me, to help my daughter, to help my son. And so there's a whole host of policies that you can pursue that actually make that harder for parents to engage. There's a whole host of policies that make it easier for parents to engage. I think I was on the school board in Dallas, and one of the things that we reflected on is, do we just zone you to a school because that's the way you bought a house and therefore that's the school you're going to get and we're going to do the deciding for you? Or do we let you choose any school that you want among Dallas? And if you live outside of Dallas, is it okay for you to come in and use any of these schools? And if some of our kids would then leave Dallas and go somewhere else, the attitude that I had as a trustee is I want that child to find the best learning environment to serve that child's need. I don't care who's doing it. That's got to happen. And so again, you think about these choices about trying to empower families to find the best fit school that meets their needs. I mean, you have schools, because this is complex work here. This is, if you want an easy job, you can work in investment banking. This is this is very difficult. This is very difficult work, and you can have a school that is actually serving 40–50% of the kids at that school amazingly well, better than any learning environment they would ever find. And yet, in that same school, a different 30 or 40% of those kids are very, very poorly served in the same building. And so we just have to recognize that we have got to make sure that we have as much investment in rigor and quality consistently for everybody, but also that you're working to constantly empower parents as a child's first teacher while working to be true partners with them in their education.
Yeah, absolutely, 100% agree. And I think that's important, right? Because we've also seen through various studies that the class of 2019, 1/3, I'm saying that right, 1/3 of the class of 2019 is not in the workforce or in higher education 6 months after graduating. And so we are seeing that kids are failing to launch, and we're losing kids, right? And this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier about, maybe that's the tyranny of low expectations, and they're just not ready. Not only are they not college ready or work ready, they're not life ready. And so what are the things that school districts should be looking at? What are the things that parents should be looking at to ensure that we are actually working towards realizing the potential of every child in the state?
Yeah, there's the high school experience is, in fact, it's actually, I think, going through quite a bit of a renaissance in Texas in recent years. We've made very significant investments in both career and college preparation at high school to make it a both and. You think about the education pendulum as a vocational education, or no, college for all, or vocational education, or college for all. It's actually a both. I graduated from Garland High School, and I got a phenomenal academic education at Garland High School, but I also had 3 years of computer science and a year of typing. And let's not sleep on a year of typing. It's probably saved a year of my life. That is the best of both worlds. That is both academic and vocational education. And so the legislature has made a bunch of moves. We formally fund something called P-TECH, which is designed to get kids so they graduate with a high school diploma, a college degree, an associate's degree, with a trade focus, an industry-based certification at the same time, and they will have already had a year of work experience. This is game-changing, especially for, say, first-generation college students, because nothing says you're college ready like you already graduated. So this is important, but we still also have what I would call a more traditional high school environment in schools around Texas. So I don't know if you reflect back to your high school experience, and what did you do your senior year? So for many students, their senior year is like homecoming and prom and cruising for chicks. I think that's still done. So, so this is, that last thing actually turns out to be quite important. But the thing is, you should not be coasting to graduation. Mm-hmm. Life is fixing to get very complicated. And if that last year of our students' educational life, their 12th school year, if we have not made that the most difficult, the most challenging, the most rigorous, the most engaging educational year of their lives, we have failed them. Because, again, if a third of them are failing to launch, did we make it easy for them by allowing them to simply coast through the end of their high school experience, expecting that when they're 19, that you know, their alarm's going to ring and somebody's going to tell them what to do? Because that's not the way it works. And so the work to make sure that we up the rigor of the high school experience on both the academic and the career preparation side, the vocational, welding and plumbing and licensure and skilled trades, this is part of, it has to be part of the high school experience and integrated as a whole. And we've really seen some good movement in this in our schools. We have, when I was first made commissioner, there was one P-Tech high school in the state of Texas, and we have now close to 250. And mind you, P-Tech high schools are designed so that the kids who graduate also graduate with a trade-focused associate's degree at the same time. So we've seen something like a 4 times increase in the number of kids who graduate with an associate's degree since I first started. And it is still growing by leaps and bounds. So this is great. This is a huge success story in public education in the last few years. And this, in career preparation, has improved even during the pandemic, despite all odds, which is great to see.
That's great. Well, I want to switch gears just a second, and I know we're going to be getting to Q&A in here in just a few moments, so please get your questions ready. But, you know, we heard earlier today at the conference, we heard the speaker and the lieutenant governor talk a lot about mental health, and in particular mental health when it comes to kids, right, and teenagers, and especially as they are kind of hitting those higher complicated years as they head into adulthood. You know, what are the things that, you know, school districts and schools need to be looking at to ensure that on the mental health side that we're also taking care of our kids? Yeah,
I mean, managing a classroom environment of 20 kids is difficult. And many of our kids walk into the schools with significant challenges in their home life. I remember very distinctly a school relaying during one of the discussions in a school visit, and a student had come to school and confided in the teacher that he just found out that his dad isn't actually his dad, and his dad doesn't love him anymore, but the dad still comes because it actually was the biological father of his brother. And the kid is melting. Yeah. And this is, we are a fallen people. This is part of our story over the last 5,000 years. And so we have to support our students to learn rigorous reading, writing, and arithmetic. The job of the school is to teach these fundamental, foundational academic skills. But these are still institutions where we start with love first and foremost. The nature of a caring, compassionate, loving adult supporting their children, supporting the students of that school, it is part of the struggle. Now, the thing is, you cannot let human compassion guide you down the road to perdition, which is unfortunately quite easy. When you hear about some challenge that a child has at home, and you say, you know, you don't need to do the classwork today anymore. That is not the right answer, because then you have extended that problem that they experience outside of school into a place that you're denying them the opportunity to learn arithmetic. And so this is why the job of teaching is incredibly challenging, and the work that we do to make sure that we can equip our teachers so that they can maintain disciplined and loving learning environments, that schools also have access to some supports for students that need access to specific accelerated supports. So the state of Texas a few years ago invested in a program called T-Chat, which, subject to a parent's permission, which is pretty critical, but once a parent provides permission, schools can gain access to licensed psychologists and therapists to provide counseling and support to kids if that should be necessary. And that's this is a support that some of our kids need. And again, you always start with an attitude of this is the parent first. You can't do anything without this mindset of empowering parents first and foremost. But we do have to have loving, nurturing learning environments that, again, are focused on reading, writing, and arithmetic.
Yeah, I agree so much. Well, so I'm going to ask one last question, and then we're going to come to questions from the audience. And, this is from more personal experience of mine. I have a young daughter who has special needs, and she was in Austin ISD, and navigating that, and navigating her diagnosis, which she has autism, and working through that to get her the help she needs from the school and the resources was incredibly frustrating. And my wife could probably come up here and spend hours, one, not only complaining about that, but then also helping people do that, which she actually does do in her free time. So what can we do to make the system better so that parents of especially special needs kids who have very unique needs, maybe not typical needs, actually get the help that their kids deserve?
Yes, this is such a complex and needed area of attention. Over the last 12 months, the legislature convened a task force, the Special Education Funding Commission, to analyze how we are providing supports, how are schools then translating the supports from the state to execute their obligation to support families. One of their recommendations is actually directly tied to initial evaluation and identification, because so much of this is it's so difficult at the very beginning, and it's actually, as you well know, it's difficult throughout. Yeah. But gaining access to services should not be this should not be an adversarial process. If a student demonstrates even the inkling of a need, we should be jumping up to try to support that student as quickly as possible. And so one of the recommendations I thought was super fascinating about that Finance Commission is they said, let's provide a dedicated stream specific to evaluation. When a child is suspected of needing special education services, school districts then have an obligation of conducting an evaluation, as you well know, and that the cost of those evaluations can range from anywhere from $500 to $5,000. Sometimes at the end of that process, the student is determined not to have a special education need, but you've still spent the money on the evaluation. Yep. And then sometimes after that, the student is determined to have a special education need. And so one of the recommendations was made was, let's just provide a dedicated funding stream so that every time you conduct an evaluation, you get X dollars to cover the cost of those evaluations, whether the kid turns out to need special education supports or not. It's an interesting financial incentive because you then have a dedicated capacity support for evaluators. Do we have enough diagnosticians? Do we have enough evaluators? Are the people that are running special education systems in school districts trained on all of the processes and procedures that they need to, so that we can really jump on and meet the needs of families immediately as opposed to with delay? And we have 1,200 independently governed school systems, and they're not all doing this well. Yeah. Some of them are doing it amazingly well, some of them less so. One of our roles at the agency is to monitor them and to provide a mechanism for performance improvement so that we can help identify the weakest points in a district's execution, give them recommendations, provide dedicated technical support, come back 6 months later and they're doing better. So we are engaging in a few districts on that front. Yeah.
Well, I think that's all really good, because I think on the parent side, what you feel is that it's process over the kids, right?
It is,
and that's extremely bureaucratic and extremely frustrating. And what we can't ever lose sight of, which I think you've highlighted so well today, is that it is about the kids and it's about the outcomes that we have as kids. And if we don't focus on that, then everything else we're doing, all the other things we're talking about this conference, they just don't matter, because we won't have a future in the state. So.
You know, the work that we do in public education is, to me, this is the most important work that man does. How do we mold eager young minds so that the next generation has it better than the last? This call that we have, and getting that right is not easy, but it's important. De Tocqueville, he's 1830s-ish for De Tocqueville experts in the room. He's traveling across the United States, and he says, This country is amazing. You have this hugely diverse population, people of different nationalities, people of different ethnic backgrounds, people of different religious faiths, and it's not that everybody's getting along, but you're not killing each other. And we've got different nationalities and ethnicities and religions in Europe, and we've been killing each other for like 1,000 years. What's going on? And one of the things that he remarked is that the peasants in America were as well educated as the aristocrats in Europe. The system of common schools that existed at the time was pretty impressive. This was the precursor to what we think of as public schools today. But the other thing that he remarked that he noticed is everybody actually seems to have read all the same stuff. There's this common knowledge. This common body of knowledge across the American politic. For those of you who know your sort of founding fathers, that's not actually an accident. So you go back 40 years or so before that, and a little-known founding father named Noah Webster, who's had many claims to fame, but you may know him from the Webster's Dictionary. He literally invented the American version of the English language. He writes pretty extensively about this, that in order for our nascent republic to actually thrive, we are going to actually have to help everybody develop a common body of knowledge. If you are familiar with the fluent in the Texas Constitution, a general diffusion of knowledge. And in a pluralistic republic where people have all kinds of different creeds and backgrounds, this common body of knowledge that can be communicated in a set of common schools turns out that Noah Webster was onto something. He actually wrote himself a textbook, and so the Webster Blueback Speller was actually really popular back then. And this is important. So when I ran for the school board initially, I was unmarried and had no children. And so everybody asked me if I was a weirdo. So but this is the thing. I care about our country. I care about our children. And we all have a stake in this. This is the future of our country. And we have a moral obligation to meet the needs of these wonderful little creatures, to try to give them the best future that we have. We have a financial obligation to keep the Texas miracle going, to keep the economy going. But we have an obligation in this 200-plus year experiment in American democracy to keep the republic going. And education is the unifying bedrock. This is to deliver on all of these founding principles. And so it is important that we get this as right as possible.
Excellent, excellent. Well, what a great way to transition now to questions. So I think we might have some, do we have microphones in the back? Okay, and there's George. So George, if you can wait for the microphone, because we're live streaming and I want people to be able to hear it. So George, come on up, and we're going to go right here to the front row and make you get a little exercise in. And so we'll patiently wait for you to get up here.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner, for your service to the state. I absolutely agree with you on the textbook approach, because that's going to eliminate the need for teachers to reinvent the wheel and to create transparency. But I'm going to ask a separate question. So a lot of our students are actually facing problems after a long summer vacation of 2.5 to 3 months. And when they come back, they don't remember what they learned before. So is there any thoughts about potentially shorten the summer vacation, and we can take some one-off vacations during the semester, or maybe make it a quarter system? And I understand that it means an increase in the amount of time, instruction time, the teacher would have to be paid for. So possibly we could reduce the daily instruction by half an hour. By my rough calculation, that's going to extend the back end for about 14 days. So that's half a month, or more than half a month. It's 5 days instruction day. So like we can play with it so
sure.
that.
So one, you're spot on, and two, Texas is probably the only state in the country that has done something very significant about this. I think we really have one of the most student-focused public policy frameworks for schools that you see anywhere in the country. So this problem of summer learning loss is a real problem. There are kids who continue to have learning opportunities in the summer, but many kids do not. And then they come back and teachers spend, half of September reteaching a bunch of stuff that kids forgot over the summer. And so the legislature several years ago set up a program called the Additional Days School Year Program. And this is optional, and it has to be decided at a local level. It's got to make sense for a local community or local school. But a school system can add up to 30 days of instruction to their elementary school calendars and have that funded by the legislature as funding is guaranteed. And what many of them do is they begin playing with their calendars to create sort of these 1 week or 2 week breaks at different chunks of the year. And even adding overall instruction. They will sometimes shorten the days, as you have said. They will, in many cases, re-engineer the school day as part of a re-engineered school year. And there's a number of school systems in the state of Texas that have already taken advantage of this. Virtually every school system actually out in El Paso has, in fact, converted to this new modified calendar to do this. And there are a few places around the state that have done this as well. So, and to my knowledge, I don't think any other state has, as a function of their school finance system, automatically funds any school that wants to do this. So, so this is an option under state law, and we have a little 30-minute video that you can watch that I think describes the exact engineering trade-off that you described. Well, so she asked, how do you incentivize? And again, what the legislature did was they did incentivize. They provide funding streams so that school districts can do it.
All right, right over here. Yes.
Hi. When I taught first grade last year, it was very obvious to me that kids had different experiences when they were home during the pandemic. So at the beginning of the school year, I had students who could read on a 4th grade level, and I had students who didn't know their alphabet.
Yep.
So I was at a complete loss of how to instruct all the kids, and was supposed to be teaching them first grade.
And this was your first year?
It was my 3rd year teaching.
Yeah.
But all 3 years were during COVID. So.
Thank you. God bless you.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for teachers in that situation, how to give rigorous instruction to a wide range of learning?
Yeah, this is an incredibly good question that has many ramifications, because you may be familiar with like the bluebird, redbird, yellowbird system, where kids were sort of grouped back in the day. That still does happen in this concept of attempting to differentiate inside the classroom. Sometimes schools will actually modify their approach to student assignment so that they will have a somewhat homogenized, whether all the kids are below grade level or right at or above, if they're all at the same place, it's just functionally easier. But sometimes that's not possible. And so what you have to have is an approach to the design of your sort of lesson arc for the 180-day track meet that is school, that is actually built in from a design perspective to provide you opportunities for what we would call Tier 1 instruction, Tier 2 instruction, Tier 3 instruction. And if you have not been given a set of instructional resources, a set of instructional materials that have already gone through that thoughtful engineering process, then you get to spend every night and all your weekends trying to figure out how to solve that problem for your kids on your own. And I don't know why we make 35,000 new teachers every year, or why we make 375,000 teachers reinvent this wheel every time. And you talked about sort of reading, and you differentiate. Some of your kids would actually need basic decoding lessons, and then some of your kids were well beyond that. So you would clearly need a chunk of instructional time devoted specifically to phonics direct instruction. And for the kids who don't need it, it is perhaps a waste of time, but for some, you may actually be filling in some little holes that you weren't unaware of, so you can actually provide that with sort of a limited downside. But then you would need a read aloud portion of the classroom, because some of your kids can't decode, and so you need to be able to do a read aloud. Your read aloud needs to be filled with rich vocabulary and rich text, But then you also think about the differentiated support. So I don't know if you had any kids who are new to the English language also in your classroom, but that is not uncommon in our schools. And so, for example, we know that there's an evidence base that if immediately before you do a read aloud with some complex text, maybe it's about, I don't know, the African savannah or something like that, if there's about a 10-second video clip of a giraffe where it says giraffe and it writes the word giraffe and it says giraffe, the kids who are new to the English language, they activate into the language and they can access that grade level content vastly more effectively. This is also true for many students who have individual accommodations in special education. But the thing is, either you have to design that all on your own, or the school district can give it to you. And it sounds like in your particular case, the school did not give it to you. And I think this is where it is incumbent upon us as a state to figure out how do we properly resource the schools with this well-designed, well-engineered materials. And I mean, I'm sorry, I get really fired up over this. So in mathematics, this is even more complicated. Because in mathematics, and you think about if you look at our data, we have seen this massive math decline post-COVID, and we're not like emerging quickly from this. And the discipline of mathematics and the way the human mind absorbs math, it is very linear. You learn one little thing, and then there's another thing that builds off the last thing, and then there's another thing that builds off the last thing, and another thing that builds off the last thing, and another thing that builds off the last thing. Well, what if we turn on some blinkers and you miss 2 or 3 of those little building blocks along the way? Well, maybe you don't get lost at tomorrow's lesson, but you will get lost eventually. Mm-hmm. And so well-designed mathematics instructional material will actually be engineered so that literally every unit and every lesson, the prerequisite knowledge for that lesson has been identified. A formative assessment has been designed to assess that prerequisite, and there's essentially a routing time to a mini pre-teach on the prerequisite. So by the time you get to the actual lesson you want, the kid's not lost with it. That's what well-designed instructional materials look like. And that material doesn't come with just an hour of planning time a week. That takes a long time to build and engineer correctly. And if we have not provided that kind of support to our kids, just don't expect them to learn math. So as long as you're fine with kids not learning math, then we can keep doing what we're doing today.
Amen. Amen. Yes, ma'am. Right here. Here, David's coming right behind you with the microphone.
Big fan of E.D. Hirsch, How to Educate a Citizen in Cultural Literacy, and that's really what you're talking about. And if there's anybody who doesn't know E.D. Hirsch, H-I-R-S-C-H, you should get his books and read them and give them to all your teachers. But that said, we have teachers who are in your situation who have not been provided with what he calls for, which is content-based education. And then teachers who are just crummy teachers anyway. And in 2 years, they are tenured. I worked in Spring Branch ISD all over the entire district the last 10 years of my work career. And I saw those bad teachers, and they go, oh my gosh, no, that person's gonna get a contract. So is there anything that can be done? You know, that school that you talked about that has 40% they're doing really well and 60% not so well, it might be the teacher they have. And that some teachers are better than others. So how do you think about the process of giving teachers tenure after 2 years, and what can be done about that?
Yeah, so under state law, most but not all teachers are not employed on an at-will basis. They're employed under term contracts, and term contracts renew automatically. Thankfully, this is not California or New York. It is, in fact, possible if you have people who are underperforming to move them out, but it's also not particularly easy. So there are different districts that take different approaches, because there's actually, the legislature has created mechanisms for districts to deregulate themselves in this way. And so it is definitely worthy of legislative policymaking attention to increase flexibility, but there are different approaches in different districts. Not every district works exactly like that, and it's a function of a local school board and whatever policies they put in place for employment in their district.
Great. All right, we have time for one last question. Right back here.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you for all the work that you do. I mean, you're a super dedicated individual. I have the opportunity to travel the state, and I talk to a lot of folks. And in general, they're very supportive of teachers, and they want education for their kids, and they want that all to succeed. but they're less enamored about administration and management, particularly when it comes to the various ISDs, and we've all seen scandals with ISDs. And the question that I get asked all the time is, do we have too many ISDs here in the state of Texas? So can you help me with that?
Let me answer indirectly. So we have about 1,000 ISD legal entities and about 200 non-ISD legal entities, mostly charter schools, charter entities of some kind. And so if you look at the ISDs as a whole and remove and we have about, what, 250 counties, 255 counties in Texas, 254?
254.
254, thank you. I should know that. The ISDs serve a student population in about 4.9 million, 4.8 million in the state of Texas. And then I'll compare that to Florida. So Florida has about 3.3 million kids. When you remove their charters, they're about 3 million even. They have 65 school systems. If you actually do the math on an apples-to-apples basis, they have literally 1/10 of the number of governing bodies that we do. 1/10 of the central offices that we do on a sort of ratio basis. So that is an answer to your question.
I'll say that's a lot. That's too much. Yes. So, all right. Well, Commissioner Morath, we're so grateful to have you. You know, Texas is lucky to have someone of your character and your caliber leading Texas Education Agency, and most importantly, the kids of Texas are lucky to have you leading it because you're doing it and you're in it for the right reasons. So, thank you for being here today. Please help me thank Commissioner Mike Morath.
Thank you.